We want to start this half hour, though, with a former CIA officer sentenced to 30 months behind bars, the first to ever be sent to jail for leaking classified secrets. We're going to talk to him exclusively in a moment. But first, with the backstory, here's NBC's Andrea Mitchell.
Okay.
John Kiriakou is enjoying precious family time.
Are you going to clobber me? Oh, okay, go ahead.
His last few weeks before going to jail, the first CIA officer to be imprisoned for disclosing classified information to a reporter.
I want to say that I come out of court positive, confident, and optimistic.
Kiriakou pleaded guilty to revealing the identity of a covert CIA officer involved in interrogating suspected al-Qaeda terrorists, an officer whose own family did not know he worked for the CIA. Prosecutors said the officer's identity later became public after turning up in a defense motion for Guantanamo detainees.
It led the investigators to Mr. Kiriakou, who then admitted in court under oath that he knowingly, intentionally outed the identity of this covert agent.
Kiriakou has portrayed himself as a whistleblower for disclosing the Bush administration's controversial waterboarding techniques, a practice later outlawed as torture. He talked to Matt in 2007.
In your opinion, torture or not torture?
I think, yes, torture. I'm not saying that it wasn't necessary at the time, and I'll let the lawyers decide if it's legal or not. But at the time, I think it was necessary to disrupt terrorist attacks.
He had had a storied intelligence career, playing a key role in capturing Abu Zubaydah and other al-Qaeda leaders. But prosecutors say he is no hero. Initially, they charged him with leaking other names, but dropped those charges when he agreed to plead guilty.
He admitted in his statement of facts that this was not the first time. He revealed other classified information to other reporters, and this was really just the tip of the iceberg.
In court Friday, federal judge Leonie Brinkema called the sentence, frankly, way too light. But Bruce Rydell, a former CIA officer, recently signed a letter urging President Obama to commute the sentence.
It is terribly ironic that in an administration that outlawed the use of torture for interrogating detainees, the only person who's going to go to prison is the person who spoke out against torture.
Joining others who say Kiriakou is being used as an example by a Justice Department determined to crack down on leaks. For today, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
And John Kiriakou is with us exclusively. John, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Depending on who you are, you look at this case differently. Some people say you betrayed your former colleagues in order to raise your media profile, hoping to sell books and to get a consulting business going. Others say you were a whistleblower. You spoke out and now you're being wrongly prosecuted. You say you wear this conviction like a badge of honor.
I do. I wear this conviction as a badge of honor because this conviction is not about leaking. This case was about torture from the very beginning. If every CIA officer or former CIA officer was prosecuted for referring a reporter to a former colleague for an interview, the prisons would be bursting with CIA officers.
Let me just stop you right there, because you acknowledged, you pleaded guilty, and you admitted that you identified a CIA officer who was in fact covert. That is against the law. You don't disagree with that?
No, and I should never have done that. That was a terrible mistake.
Do you think prosecutors should have let this slide?
I think that there are administrative measures that could have been taken. I mean, certainly when this happens with current CIA officers, you get a letter of reprimand in your file. You get 2 weeks without pay. There are other laws or other government regulations that can be used to take care of something like this. But to pursue me for the Intelligence Identities Protection Act was heavy-handed. In fact, the author of the Intelligence Identities Protection Act volunteered to serve as an expert witness at my trial, because he said this was not why the law was written.
You consider yourself a whistleblower, correct?
I do now. I didn't in the beginning, but I've come to learn that most whistleblowers don't believe they're whistleblowers in the beginning. I do meet the legal definition of whistleblowing, and that is someone who brings to light evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality. And that's what I did. It's
a little nuanced, though, isn't it? Because you're saying that the government started targeting you after you spoke out first in 2007, a time when you said these practices, in your view, were torture. You said that officials high in the government authorized them. You also said they worked. In fact, in 2007, you told MSNBC you were coming forward then because you thought that the agency had gotten, quote, a bum rap on waterboarding. That's somebody who's defending these practices, not denouncing them.
Yes, I did defend the practice in the beginning because I was relying on what the CIA had told CIA officers inside the building, that these methods were effective. That turned out to be a lie.
Fair enough, but then how does that make you a whistleblower?
Because in that original interview on ABC in 2007, I said that it was torture, and I said that it was official U.S. government policy.
If your purpose was to blow the whistle by talking to some of these reporters, and you've admitted not just to the leaking of the one name, but you also acknowledged giving classified information to yet a second reporter. Did you ask these journalists, hey, what are you going to do with this information?
Well, let me correct you on one thing. This is something that the prosecution has been saying from the very beginning. They actually charged me with espionage for quote-unquote leaking the name of a former colleague to a New York Times reporter. That colleague was never undercover. I did not leak the name. The reporter came to me with the name and said, can you talk to me about this guy?
I think specifically the charges said that you disclosed the connection of that officer to a classified operation. That's what you acknowledged in your statement of facts.
The classified operation being the rendition, detention, interrogation program. It was no secret that the CIA in 2008, 2009 was seeking to capture and detain al-Qaeda leaders.
Let's try to clear something up. In a recent New York Times article, you expressed some remorse about disclosing this officer's identity. Yes. You said, if I'd known the guy was still undercover, I would have never mentioned him. And yet, in a recorded FBI interview a year ago, you said you knew that this officer was always undercover. You said, how the heck did they get him? And in your acknowledgement to the court in connection with this guilty plea, you said, yes, I knew he was undercover. So which is it?
Well, I knew he was undercover through the course of his career. I had also heard that he had retired and he was living somewhere in Northern Virginia. I didn't realize that he had retired undercover. That's not an excuse. It's not a defense. It's an explanation.
Are you hoping that President Obama will commute your sentence? You have many supporters who think that he should.
I've been very fortunate. There are many prominent Americans from the left, from the right, and from the center who are asking the president to commute my sentence. I hope that he does, of course. I believed in President Obama. I still do. I voted for President Obama, and I know that in his heart he's anti-torture. This case is about torture, and I would hate for there to be only one person going to prison related to the torture program, and it being me, when the torturers are walking free, and those who conceived of the torture are free, those who destroyed evidence of the torture are free, and even the attorneys who papered over the torture are free.
But does that absolve you of your wrongdoing in this case?
No, and I accept responsibility for my wrongdoing.
One final thing. You disclosed the name of this officer to this journalist. The journalist in turn passed it to a defense investigator. A picture of this officer ended up in the jail cell of a terror suspect. How do you feel about that?
I feel awful, and I wonder why the Justice Department didn't investigate the journalist.
All right,
because he really wasn't a journalist. He was working for the defense.
John Kiriakou, thank you very much. It's good to have you here.
Thanks very much.